best way to start is to introduce myself and who I am and what I'm not. I've spent most of my life in government. I'm about over 30 years working in various parts of the national security side. So I was amused when I heard about Jonathan G. down in Bude. I think it's hilarious that they have these. Maybe I should call myself Tarquin F, but actually with a name like Tarquin, that'd probably be lost on everybody and a complete waste of time. But anyway, so I left government in 2013. I suppose my last 3 years in government were about cyber outreach to governments in Asia Pacific. And that's where I began to get hooked. So I walked into jobs, or should I say walked, I got myself into a job in the tech sector, and I've been in the tech sector ever since 2013. And currently, I'm the vice chairman of a group called SASIG. SASIG is the Security Awareness Special Interest Group. It's been around for over 20 years, and it was started by a guy called Martin Smith, who also ran a cybersecurity advisory company called the Security Company, which was a lovely original name. But Martin's a lovely bloke, and he set up an idea to have a membership of people who are interested in cybersecurity in particular. But the membership was free and is free. So anybody can become a member as long as you're not a cyber vendor. And the aim of SASIG is to provide and produce an environment, a trusted and safe environment, where businesses that have issues on cyber can come and talk without, rather like today, without the pressure or stress of feeling they're going to be sold a solution to that problem or be subject to a massive marketing scheme. So the only vendors or cybersecurity vendors we allow into SASIG are our supporters group, and they pay an annual subscription fee. We limit them to 16, and they have a strict code of conduct in that they are not allowed to sell. But what they can do is demonstrate their expertise through webinars. We run 3 webinars a week. We run 3 to 4 in-person events a month on various subjects. I'll give you a couple of examples later on. And they get access as a trusted member to that community, but they're not allowed to sell. Obviously, what they can do is develop strategic relationships. And the critical piece is about trust, because having worked in this sector now, I realize that you can't sell anything to anybody unless you've got their trust and confidence in what you're doing. So we have currently nearly 8,000 members. They cover a wide variety of sectors, from government, private sector, law enforcement. We have a big relationship with law enforcement, charities and academia. And we cover about just over 2,500 organizations. What was interesting with it, or so appropriate, given the subject I'm going to try and address today, is that I was at an event co-hosted by SASIG and BT. We co-host with a lot of big companies, and that was on awareness, on how to build awareness in large organizations. And that was an event that took place for about half a day, from about 9 o'clock in the morning till, well, actually about 3 o'clock by the time the networking had ended. We had just under 100 people present, and we had over 100 people online watching the event as well. So these are quite big numbers. Our webinars, I mean, everybody tells me webinars are dead, but they don't seem to be on SASIG, because even though we run 3 a week, we tend to get the smallest audiences about 40, but we did one on geopolitics last Friday, and that attracted an audience of 92. So I just say, if you want to become members, go to the SASIG website. As I said, it's free. Members also can get access to the 550, actually probably nearly 600 webinar videos we've got on particular subjects, ranging from the technical, the deeply technical, to more strategic stuff. So that's my slight pitch on SASIG, and it probably gives you an idea of where I'm coming from. So to give you a bit about my technical background, I'm not technical. I'm a humble history graduate from Ireland, but I do understand human vulnerability, and I do understand how you break into organizations. And I suppose the other thing is that I've spent most of my career in government dealing with crises on a regular basis. Small, probably tactical crises, but crises nonetheless. And so I understand a bit about resilience and about adaptability, and I'll come on to that in a minute. I'm also aware that I don't really know much about the audience and how technically knowledgeable you are on cyber. I suspect you are probably pretty knowledgeable. So I hope I'm not oversimplifying issues when I talk about the areas I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about three things, which very quickly: threats, risk, and awareness. And on threats, I'm not going to be too long because I think we spend too much time thinking about threats. And actually, we don't have a great deal of control, unless we're a government, to take any action to disrupt those threats, unfortunately. If we tried, we'd probably be banged up for some criminal act. So, first of all, the first thing I'm going to talk about in terms of threats is not cyber, but geopolitics. We live in a very different world since the last 12 months. The invasion of Ukraine didn't come, as Andrew Bailey of the Bank of England claimed, like an event out of a clear blue sky. In fact, he suggested it was a complete surprise. We knew for some time, months, if not actually years, that President Putin was planning and would attack Ukraine. And in fact, the 24th of February was pretty well signposted. We knew they were going to do it. So I don't know, Andrew Bailey, obviously at the Bank of England, wasn't getting his intelligence feed as he should have been. What it's done is it has driven a great big truck through the world order that we live in, the law-based world order, which is effectively destroyed. And so we're living in a completely different world. And that's going to have an impact on cyber, because whether we like it or not, regardless of whether Russia gets beaten in Ukraine or not, I suspect it will get beaten, we will have a bitter, twisted government in Moscow determined on revenge. And we are going to enter, if not, we have already, a Cold War with Russia, which is going to require us to consider the resources we already have and how we're going to use them. And in particular, that's going to impact in cyber, because cyber is a key component of what the military call the gray zone. That's between hostile conflict and peace, where the Russian intelligence services have been active for a significant period of time. Now, in the past, we didn't really talk much about state actors as a threat, because it only seemed to appear for organizations like defense, anybody involved in defense or anybody involved in critical national infrastructure. But now, because of the way that Russia is evolving, and the greatest fear, I think, is not Russia going nuclear, but the greatest fear is that Russia becomes a failed state. And there's a chance that that may happen in the next 12 months. And then there's a big question mark about what happens to their nuclear, chemical, and biological capability. But we also have intelligence services in Russia who have a very close relationship with criminal gangs and who are seen to be piggybacking off what criminal gangs are doing to attack organizations and institutions. So that is a real threat, which I think actually impacts on all of us in a much bigger way than we imagined, say, 12 months ago. So if we look at some of the trends that came last year, I suspect they'll continue into next year. We will see ransomware as continuing as a major threat because it's such a good business model. I don't know whether you collaborate or talk to the cyber resilience centers in the Southwest. I'm sure you do. But I was talking to one in London, and the conviction rate for crime in cyber is laughable. It's 0.08%. So for the criminals, there is no threat from conviction if they carry out. It's a risk-free environment. And therefore, why would they not fill their boots with ransomware attacks? The same goes for cyber fraud. I think online fraud is going to increase. It's going to be exacerbated by frauds specifically targeting those with cost of living opportunities, just as it did during the pandemic. And they are banking on a population that still isn't really aware of the online threats they're facing. The other big thing that's coming up, and so that the NCSC has done a report, they refer to this under the terms of proliferation, and that's very much the case. I think we're going to see an expansion of the number of kind of criminal activities on cyberspace against organizations and individuals. And finally, the one other place which I think is really worrying is supply chains. If anything, we have learned from the pandemic, we have seen the fragility of our supply chains. We've failed to understand how they exist. And Ukraine has made that much worse. If you take Nord Stream 2 as a classic example of a failure to understand and put all your eggs in one very, very vulnerable basket, it's Nord Stream 2. Look at what's happened to Europe, or what happened to Europe last year and to us in terms of the cost of living and energy prices. And if we think that Ukraine's bad, if China is to invade Taiwan, that's going to be even worse, because Taiwan produces 70% of the semiconductors for our industries, and any attack by China there would severely disrupt that, probably putting us back decades in terms of our technological involvement. So there's some real hard threats out there, but they're ones that we can't control. They're ones that only government really can have a go on. So I thought I'd talk a bit about risk now, because I think sometimes we kind of conflate risk with threat, and I think they're very different things. It's a truism that threats and vulnerabilities are kind of cohabiting. They have to coexist. If you didn't have any threats, you wouldn't have to worry about vulnerabilities. And if you have no vulnerabilities, then you have no threats. But unfortunately, that isn't the real world. So threat and vulnerability are a classic part of our risk appreciation. And how we do look at risk is about the impact of what something's going to happen on our business, on our organization, on ourselves, and the likelihood. Those are the two key parts of the risk equation. And we tend to write our matrix out in terms of, so for example, if we look at the risk register the government had, which I was involved in way back before in about 2013, number one on that risk register was a pandemic. And we spent about 5 seconds talking about it, because we thought the probability was highly unlikely, although the risk, the impact could have been quite severe. And boy, have we found that out now. And I think it's an example of how organizations tend to write risk registers and look at the impact, but actually only pay lip service to what that means. So you've got to be really realistic in terms of looking at risk, and looking at it not from a technical side, but always from a business risk side. How are these threats that we're facing out there? How relevant are they to me? How do they fit with the vulnerabilities I've got in my own systems? And what impact will they have on my ability to deliver the product that I have to my clients, for example, or to provide the services that I need to? And if you look at it through that paradigm, it's much easier to understand what you need to focus on and how you need to tackle it. I think there is, I've seen it certainly in going to some organizations where I've been advising in my old days before SASIG, where you find organizations that take on what the CISO tells them to take on because it's too frightening to consider, if I don't and I get a breach, am I going to be blamed for it? Without actually considering, what does that capability do in terms of defeating the threats or the risk, or ameliorating or mitigating the risk to parts of my sector or industry or business and its ability to carry on. So there's this, so business risk I think is really important. And a lot of people, I mean, I've listened to loads of discussions about risk, and people always talk about reputation. And I had a long discussion with a lawyer yesterday about reputational risk. I think reputational risk is the one thing that we don't really have to worry about, because even 6 months after TalkTalk was breached, if you talk to the average man on the street, he hadn't a clue that TalkTalk had been breached. So reputation is something that sits in the minds of organizations, but probably doesn't sit in the minds of people outside the organization. What really causes problems is when your ability, such as, for example, Colonial Pipeline, to deliver product to your clients is disrupted by a cyber attack. Well, we can see that in other organizations as well. Maersk, high-profile organizations like Maersk, like Target, who was hit by a cyber attack years ago. The real impact was on their bottom line, not on their reputation, because their share price, funnily enough, stayed pretty consistent. So it's really about what disrupts my operational capability to deliver. And now I come on to awareness. As I said yesterday, we did a big program about awareness, and we talked a lot about how you get your organization to become more aware about cyber. And I think awareness has become the kind of buzzword for 2022, along with resilience. And I would suggest that the next buzzword for 2023 is probably going to be adaptability, but I'll come on to that in a moment. So I think when we talk about awareness, we've got to consider about in our own organizations, we understand that we have a cyber threat, because everybody does. As somebody wrote on LinkedIn the other day, we live in a cyber world. And when we talk about the IT function, it isn't a function that's separate or subordinate to a business. It's actually the critical lifeblood of a business. If the IT part fails, the business will fail. So we've got to figure out what's important and what we want to achieve, and how we want to achieve it with the individuals, and what effect we want to have in our compliance, in our approach to awareness. I think organizations are influenced in awareness largely by compliance. Certainly if you're in the financial sector, you are required, and there is a lot more stick than there is carrot in the way it's approached. But this is about winning hearts and minds within an organization to make sure that your people provide you with the kind of basic security that enables you to protect yourselves. I'll give you a kind of example of this. I was talking yesterday about a company, one of the big oil companies, and they have a zero tolerance towards clicking on dodgy links through phishing emails. All that's done is to suppress any reporting of mistakes, human error. And human error remains, I think, the biggest problem for most organizations. And we can't legislate against it. People are going to make mistakes. But the key bit is, how do you respond when those mistakes happen? And the first bit of that is that you need people to tell you, I've made a mistake, I've clicked on this link. So how you set up the right culture within your organization so that people are honest and feel that they are trusted, and that they can give that information without real fear of reciprocal or fear of punishment, for example, is probably probably pretty critical. The sooner you get to understand or know that something has happened, the sooner you can respond to it. Because as we know in cyber attacks, things move at a tremendous pace. So we talked about a lot yesterday about engagement with our people. It depends on how big the organizations are. Now, yesterday we were talking about organizations that are, 100,000, so vast. And I suspect that here we're talking about much smaller groups where it's much easier to communicate and much easier to talk and raise awareness. But how you communicate and talk to people about making them more aware about the risks that are out there, or the threats that are out there, and how they can mitigate them, is going to be quite critical. And I would suggest that one of the things that really helps is having a holistic approach and looking at how they can help themselves to protect themselves at home. If you have a good habit in terms of being cyber aware at home, protecting your own bank account, protecting your own emails, your own private emails, you will bring that behavior back into the organization. So that's absolutely critical. And I think setting the tone is key. Identifying who are the influencers within your organization. That may not be, for example, the CEO. It may be individuals who have, for various reasons, a leadership skill or leadership quality, which people follow and adhere to, and can become role models or ambassadors for awareness. So they are really important. One of the things we talked about yesterday was leadership engagement. Yes, it's important to set the cultural tone in any organization. The leadership does that. But funny enough, if you're a person in a business, you tend to listen and look at your line manager, not somebody in the C-suite. So we were talking about the importance of line managers or anybody in a management role in promoting best behavior and setting the right example. If you look at how organizations run health and safety, you can probably see that if they're very lax on those kind of things, they're probably going to be pretty lax when it comes to cybersecurity. So that's another thing. And I talked about the holistic approach as well. The final thing is how you measure impact. And to do that, you have to understand where you are currently in your cyber awareness program. And then there are methods and there are a number of tools out there that enable you to figure out what kind of impact you're having through discussion. I think the really critical piece is about the continuous discussion and communication with your teams to make them more resilient, and to develop an understanding of your capability so that when something does happen, and it's usually going to be at a time that's inconvenient to you and by a method which you had not anticipated, because that always happens, it's about how you adapt to the unexpected. And that's only by developing the kind of team working and the practice and training that goes with that, and the communications that go with that, to enable people to know what they do when a crisis or an event occurs. So I'm going to stop at that.